Good evening and welcome to the WDSU News Hot Seat. I'm Juliana Mazza. Most New Orleanians would agree it's important to drive safe and slow in school zones. But the Cantrell administration recently changed school zone speed cameras and at what speed they issue you a ticket. They lowered that threshold quietly without informing the public or even the city council. And people are not happy about it. City Councilman Darrell Brossette here with us tonight to talk about that change and what the council is trying to do about it. But first, I just want to bring y'all up to speed.
I think the question for everybody is it truly about the safety or is it about the money?
It's a story WDSU has been following.
It was not my intention to break the law.
We reported the city of New Orleans in February changed the threshold to trigger a school zone speeding ticket from 26 and a 20 down to 24 and a 20. And they did it under the radar.
4 miles an hour over the limit. Come on, man, give me some grace.
But it really would have been nice to know that the thresholds were adjusted.
The city says it's all about safety, but we found out 2 months prior to that change, the city found out that 2 mile an hour difference could mean anywhere from $5 to $7 million in extra revenue.
I don't think anybody argues with the fact that we should be driving the proper speed limit, especially through school zones. And if it is about the safety, let us know. I think this rubbed most people the wrong way.
We asked the city point blank if the money was the reason that ticket threshold was changed. They didn't answer the question directly, but said speeding in school zones remains dangerous and illegal, and we believe that ticketing drivers who speed through school zones is an effective deterrent.
It's not a preventative measure. I think it's just more that the city is trying to make money.
So we have a few issues here, Councilman Brossette. So one of the first ones I want to address is the money. Residents questioning what the motive was here by changing this threshold without notice. How do you respond to some of those concerns?
Well, I would say my concern is about transparency. Government should be very open. The administration should have announced back in February when they made the changes to the traffic ticketing policy program. They should have announced along with any other changes as they did with the removal of the traffic cameras. They should have announced at the same time the lowering of the threshold. They announced the removal of the traffic cameras. It would have been very goodwill to also announce the lowering of the threshold policy change as well. It's important that the administration to announce at the same time the lowering of the threshold to the public so the public could know and act accordingly and change their behavior. That would have made good sense, and I think the public would have received that well. And that's why we are, the City Council, as chair of the Budget Committee, we are seeking answers in tomorrow's budget hearing to see why that was not announced.
Do you speculate? I mean, were you wondering yourself, I mean, why wasn't this announced, not just to the public, but to the council? Because the council, to my knowledge, was also left in the dark and not made aware of this change.
Of course, the council was left in the dark, as well as the public. And we are seeking answers as to why. Of course, in November, we just finished the budget process, and we are just learning within the past few weeks, and more recently, that a study was done in December as to what this lowering of the threshold would look like. And the public, justifiably so, questions whether this was money-driven or public safety driven, and whether it was either or public safety or money driven, show us the correlation if it's public safety. And that is the answers that we seek. I have requested the administration and the CAO's office, the mayor's office, to appear before the budget committee. That is what my colleagues and myself seek to find from the administration, because it is important. The public needs to know. It creates a level of mistrust when you do not announce a policy shift to this magnitude. It doesn't have to be, and it should have been made on the front end.
And I want to get more on this hearing tomorrow in just a moment. But first, I mean, when you talk about transparency, obviously the council wants to have a good working relationship with the mayor of New Orleans, regardless who the mayor is. And when the council wasn't told about the change, was the council ever looped into the study that, was referenced, that was performed a couple months before the change was made, looking to see how much revenue this could generate? Were you guys looped into that study?
No, we were not looped into the study. As I said, the study, come to find out, was made in the media. We found out through print media, as well as come to find out it was done in December, which was after the budget hearings. Now, during the budget hearings, we were made aware of the removal of traffic cameras. Now we are finding out that not only the announcement of the lowering of the threshold was removed from a press release, come to find out through public records requests, but also that a study was done about lowering the threshold that we were not made aware of. And so that is, we're not encouraged by that, and we want to know why we were not made aware of, and the public was not made aware of that important decision, because the public should have been made aware of that.
And you touched on a key point that I think is very important. So this was, through a public records request, found out that it could have been put in a press release, but was then later removed from the press release. So that shows that there was at least at some point a conversation of, do we inform the public or do we not inform the public? What does that say? I mean, when you now know that those conversations obviously were happening and the decision was made specifically to not inform the public or the council? Well,
I mean, that's very disheartening when you have a decision of that magnitude being made to not inform the public about behavioral decisions and policy that one is to live every day by. The council passes laws and the mayor signs them, and the administration makes policy and can change policy from day to day. And we as citizens are expected to adhere to those policies and those laws. However, when those changes are made, the public needs to be made aware. And so different departments supported a public relations campaign to make the public aware. And what we're attempting to find out tomorrow, not whether it was related to public safety, because look, we all want everybody to go to work, go to school, our kids to be safe. But this goes to transparency and why the public was not made aware.
And let's talk about that hearing that's coming up tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., I believe, is that correct?
Yeah, 10 a.m., City Council chambers, and the CAO is to appear along with a representative of the mayor's office. What's the goal and the possible outcome that you're hoping for from this public hearing? Well, my goal is to one, hopefully this won't happen again, and two, we want to know why the public was not made aware, of course, as stated before, and then three, back in March, Council President Williams had a Ticket Amnesty Day resolution that the entire City Council supported, and we want to know where it is the administration today on those plans of rolling out a Ticket Amnesty Day for the citizens of New Orleans to come pay their outstanding tickets, parking tickets, and traffic tickets.
How would a Ticket Amnesty Day work? If someone has tickets, how does that happen?
Well, that's what we want to hear from the administration tomorrow. That would take the Department of Public Works, of course, Department of Finance, and the Law Department in the CAO's office, all working together in conjunction with us, and of course, a public relations campaign to let the public know that this is upcoming, and to come and pay your outstanding parking and traffic violations.
Could this give residents any reprieve, if they receive several
Potentially, and that's what we want to hear from them as we were all together, all my colleagues, in support of that council resolution for a ticket amnesty day.
And now when we look at the money that this could generate, that study that we were talking about from December showed that this could generate, just reducing that ticketing threshold from 26 down to 24, could produce anywhere from $5.7 to $7.5 million in additional revenue from these cameras. I think it's in addition to $23 million that they already produce. So where could that extra, potentially $7 million, do we know where that would go, how that would be used?
Well, I mean, that's a decision that the council would have to decide together. I mean, that's money that will go to the general fund, and as we go into the next budget cycle for 2020, we would have to make those decisions as we look at the next year's revenue projections and what we expend this year. We haven't had a revenue estimating conference as of yet. Of course, property taxes was due at the end of January, February 1st, and we have to see what has come in and how we are doing this year and what we're going to do by the end of the year. The mayor has gone to a zero-based budgeting process, which is different from previous years, and so the administration is adjusting to that, and we're gonna have to determine where that money goes. But at the end of the day, we have to collectively decide what's the best use of that money, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be affordable housing, and so forth.
Okay, my last question for you before we run out of time is just, during the campaign trail, the mayor had consistently said that taking and removing all cameras was part of her campaign promise. Now we know that there's a caveat to that, keeping them in school zones. Do you think that this was, backing off from a promise that was made? Is this an unkept promise?
Well, I mean, the mayor has to make that decision for herself, and the decision as far as policy, as she takes her administration the way she wants to go. I know from my standpoint as a council member, the fiduciary member of the budget committee, and an elected official of city government, I have to make sure that people are made aware and be held accountable, and make sure that that citizens know what their policies are being, they're being governed by. And so I want to make sure that there are checks and balances, and that's what you see your city council doing as it relates to this issue that we have going before the city council budget committee tomorrow.
Okay, and speaking of that hearing tomorrow, so that is 10 a.m. at City Council chambers, a public hearing. So that means that the public is invited to come and learn some more information. WDSU News will continue to follow the story. We will be at that meeting tomorrow, but unfortunately that is all the time we have for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back after the break.